Why was everyone staring at her? The Osprey's engine screamed into the desert sky, kicking up dust like an angry god, and still, the laughter found its way through. It was the kind of laughter that carried distance, sharp, careless, dismissive. She didn't look at them, didn't give them that satisfaction, but she felt the heat of their eyes the way you feel the sun burning the back of your neck. Sergeant Eva Rostova stepped down from the ramp and onto the gravel of forward operating base Dagger. The air was thick with grit and diesel, a dryness that clung to her tongue and found its way into her lungs. The midday sun pressed down like a weight, turning her body into an anvil that the desert hammered again and again. She had fought this heat before. She could fight it again. But the cast on her left arm, that was something different. That was new. A dense plaster shell swallowed her hand and forearm, running from her knuckles to just below the elbow. A suffocating reminder of the bone-deep crack that had taken her out of the last fight. It pulled her off balance, a dead weight she couldn't ignore, no matter how much she tried. Her boots crunched across the gravel. Her duffel, slung on her right shoulder, dug into the muscle hard enough to ache. Her uniform, newly issued, was already streaked with sweat, but none of that was what the Marines noticed. They saw the cast. It was a punchline before it was a wound. "Look what supply dropped off," a lance corporal whispered, not bothering to lower his voice enough. "One-armed paper pusher," another muttered. "Hope she can file reports with her good hand." The chuckles spread like sparks catching dry brush, some muffled behind calloused hands, others barked openly into the blazing air. They saw a liability in uniform, a symbol of weakness in a place that worshipped strength. Eva didn't slow, didn't blink. She had heard laughter before, in barracks, in training, in mess halls when her accent was thicker and her silence mistaken for stupidity. She had learned long ago what laughter like this really was, fear disguised as bravado, weakness masquerading as strength. She let it wash over her and moved on. Every step was measured, purposeful. She didn't see a dusty airfield. She saw a map, angles, sight lines, weak points. She noted the gaps in the HESCO barriers, the sag in the concertina wire near the western fence, the blind spots in the guard towers where an enemy could crawl close without ever being seen. Her eyes picked up the smallest details, the way sunlight bounced off Tower 3 at just the wrong angle, blinding the sentry inside. She cataloged posture, readiness, reaction time. She noted how the Marines' focus broke when the Osprey's roar peaked, their eyes pulled skyward, a lapse. Small but costly. It was all intelligence, all of it mattered. Her left arm throbbed, every pulse a dull echo of the fracture that had brought her here. Failure whispered at her from inside the plaster. She ignored it. Her face was a mask, stoic, controlled, nothing to give away the storm inside. She entered the command operations tent. The air was cooler, but the atmosphere tighter, charged with the crackle of radios and the constant hum of servers. Maps and satellite images papered every wall, layered with colored markers, grease pencil notes, overlapping arrows. Chaos frozen in ink. At the center stood Colonel Marcus Thorne. He was stone-shaped into human form, a man with a voice like gravel and a face carved by impatience. He looked up from his map when she approached. His eyes fell instantly to the cast. The folder with her orders landed on his table with a flat slap. He flipped pages. His frown deepened with each turn. When he spoke, the words carried weight. "Sergeant Eva Rostova," he said, his voice a growl. "Special Operations Command, very mysterious, and now a Class 3 compound fracture." He circled the tactical table like a predator sizing up a wounded animal. "The paperwork says you're cleared for non-combat duties. Administrative, analytical. Is that a joke?" Eva stood at parade rest, one hand behind her back, the cast hanging like an accusation. Her voice was flat, even. "No, sir." Thorne scoffed, the sound like metal grating on stone. "This is FOB Dagger, Sergeant, the sharp end of the spear. We don't have time to babysit broken operators. I need trigger pullers, not clerks." He leaned forward, hands braced on the map, his presence filling the space between them. "So I'll ask you again, what earthly use are you to me here, with one functioning arm?" The tent went still. Officers stopped pretending to type, stopped pretending to shuffle papers. All eyes were on her, waiting for the humiliation, waiting for her to flinch. She didn't. "I can provide threat assessment, pattern analysis, logistical oversight, patrol optimization." Her tone was calm, precise. "Supply chains, risk management." Thorne waved her words away like flies. "I've got officers for that, analysts, systems, you're a sergeant." He straightened, decision already made. "You'll report to the S1 tent, personnel records, try not to get a paper cut." "Dismissed." The words weren't spoken, but they rang clear enough. "Yes, sir." She pivoted sharply, leaving the tent without looking back. The weight of his contempt pressed as heavy as the plaster on her arm. They gave her a desk in the corner of the logistics tent, a cramped space smelling of stale coffee and canvas. Her assignment: reconcile fuel manifests with convoy logs, a task so dull it might have been chosen specifically to bury her. She didn't complain, didn't slow. Her right hand flew across the keyboard with mechanical precision. Numbers weren't just numbers to her. They were stories, patterns, warnings. Within 2 days, she had rebuilt the entire fuel database from scratch, cross-referencing refuel schedules, terrain data, and vehicle efficiency. She caught an inefficiency that was draining 400 gallons of diesel a week. She wrote a report, filed it, and received nothing but a grunt before her work hit a basket and was forgotten. But someone noticed. Corporal Diaz, young, quiet, a mind still unbroken by cynicism. He saw the way she moved, efficient, economical. The way she drank from a canteen like she was rationing her seconds, not just her water. The way she sat at chow alone, always with her back to a wall, always facing the entrance. Not paranoia, awareness. And when he saw her one hand disassemble an M9 pistol behind the armory, the cast resting uselessly on the table, the truth cut through his doubt. She wasn't broken. She was something else entirely. A storm gathered on the horizon. The veterans called it a haboob, a wall of sand and fury that could choke engines and strip the skin from your throat. Radios began to fail. First satellite, then short range. FOB Dagger went blind, deaf. A patrol Victor 6 overdue. 4 hours late. Out there in the storm, swallowed. Inside the base, nerves frayed. Marines argued, tempers flared. In the wrecked tent, Corporal Gant, the loudest of her critics, turned a sparring match into a brawl. His size and rage drowned out discipline. 3 against 1. A younger private cornered. The tent a ring of shouting voices and fists. Eva heard it before she saw it. The thud of knuckles on flesh. The crash of gear. The rhythm of a breakdown. She stepped inside. The scene unfolded in an instant, Gant and his friends circling, the private gasping, the crowd of Marines feeding the chaos with silence. No one moved to stop it. She did. She didn't shout, didn't call MPs. She simply walked forward. The first man swung wild. She pivoted, guided his wrist away with her palm, redirected him past her own center. A nerve strike under his ear dropped him like his strings had been cut. The second lunged. She parried the jab with her forearm and lifted her plastered arm tight across her body. His punch landed hard against the cast, and it was his bones that broke. Gant roared, a bull in human form. He charged head down. She planted her feet. The impact was agony, a white-hot surge up her fractured bones, but she held, half a second, long enough. Her right hand snatched his collar, pivoted, pulled, turned his momentum against him. His body flipped. He hit the mat with a thunderous crash. Silence fell. 3 men down, 10 seconds, 1 arm. Eva stood over them, her breath steady, her face unreadable. She scanned the circle of stunned Marines once, then walked out. Not a word. But her silence spoke louder than any victory cry. And in that silence, a legend began. What happens when silence becomes louder than noise? At FOB Dagger, stories traveled faster than any official report, faster than encrypted radio, faster than word from command. And in the days after the wreck tent fight, the story of the one-armed sergeant moved through the base like wildfire through dry brush. It was told in hushed whispers over chow, in the motor pool, at the wire on midnight guard shifts. But the versions didn't match. Some swore she hadn't even touched the men, that she just looked at them and they collapsed. Others claimed her cast had glowed, turned into a weapon forged from something not quite human. Exaggerations fed the myth. But the truth, for those who had seen it, was harder to exaggerate. 3 men, 10 seconds, and a woman with one arm who never raised her voice. For Corporal Gant, the bruises on his throat were proof enough. He didn't joke anymore, didn't laugh when her name came up. When others pressed him, he would only shake his head and mutter the same words. "She's not normal." That silence, his silence, was almost louder than her victory. Corporal Diaz watched the shift with quiet satisfaction. He'd been the first to notice her precision, her patterns, her discipline. Now the rest of the base was beginning to see what he had seen from the start. And yet, he could sense there was more than discipline, more than efficiency, something hidden, coiled beneath the surface. But what? The sandstorm raged on outside the wire, blotting out the horizon. A yellow haze that swallowed the sun, choked engines, and turned the air into fire. The base was blind, deaf, radios useless. The storm made the Marines restless, made tempers raw, and it left Colonel Thorne with a single question pounding inside his skull. Where was Victor 6? The patrol was still missing, 12 Marines, overdue by hours that stretched into a day. Every minute without word was another twist of the knife. Inside the command tent, officers scrambled. Maps covered the table, each arrow and circle another guess in the dark. But every plan ended in the same place: uncertainty. Thorne paced like a caged animal, jaw tight, shoulders hard. He had built a reputation on control, on precision, on always having an answer. But here, in the howl of the storm, he had nothing. And then she walked in. No request, no hesitation, just stepped inside the room where captains and lieutenants stood frozen in panic. "I have a probable location for Victor 6, she said, her voice level calm, "and a safe route for extraction." Every head turned. Thorne bristled. He was ready to snap, to dismiss her like before. But then he remembered the report from the wreck tent. 3 Marines down, no weapons, no casualties, only her. "You have my attention, Sergeant," he said at last. "Explain." She stepped forward, her cast tucked close to her side, her right hand tracing the map with deliberate precision. Victor 6 had taken the ridge line. That was predictable. That was doctrine, but doctrine was a trap. The enemy knew those choke points, had likely mined the flanks. She pointed to disturbances in the soil on satellite images, barely visible, easy to dismiss. But to her eyes, signs of pressure plates, a minefield no one else had caught. Then she explained the radio chatter. Bursts others had written off as static. She had seen the pattern, recognized the rhythm. It wasn't noise, it was enemy coordination, setting the trap. Finally, she pointed to the only option: 2 collapsed cisterns, geological survey markers no one else had bothered to check, shelters deep enough to hide a squad from the storm, the only tactically sound choice. Her finger traced a path across the map. It looked suicidal, open ground, fully exposed, but under the cover of the sandstorm, perfect concealment, a route no insurgent would expect. The room was silent. It wasn't just analysis, it was art. Thorne stared at her, anger and doubt wrestling with something heavier, the creeping recognition that he was in the presence of someone operating at a level beyond his own. "Captain," he barked at last, "assemble the QRF. They'll follow her route exactly." And just like that, the gamble began. For 3 hours the base held its breath, radios dead, visibility zero, the platoon groping through the storm on nothing but GPS and a one-armed sergeant's intuition. Thorne paced until his boots wore lines into the gravel floor. He staked the lives of 24 Marines on her word, his career, his command, his men. And then through static, a single word. Jackpot. The tent erupted. Cheers, sighs, tears swallowed back. Victor 6 had been found, alive, huddled exactly where she said they'd be. When the patrol limped back through the storm, battered but unbroken, the relief was so thick you could taste it. But Thorne, he wasn't celebrating. He walked straight to the annex, sealed the comms container and made a call. The general's face flickered onto the screen, impatient, busy, but when Thorne spoke Eva's name, when he gave her service number, something changed. The general's expression dropped. Gravity replaced irritation. "Colonel," he said, his voice lower now, "do you know who you have on that base?" Thorne frowned. "A sergeant with a broken arm." "No," the general said, "you have a living legend." And then he told him the truth, or enough of it to chill Thorne to his bones. Her call sign was Wraith. She had fought at Alsam, held off 24 insurgents alone for 6 hours after her team was killed. The broken arm, that wasn't from an accident. It was from the final moments when she snapped bone against steel, using her rifle as a club to kill the enemy commander. Thorne sat in silence, the story crashing down on him. The woman he had sent to reconcile fuel logs had already carved her name into history. When he stepped out of the annex, the storm was breaking. Sunlight filtered weakly through thinning clouds, painting the base in fractured gold. He scanned the yard until he saw her. Eva stood in the motor pool, directing a forklift with one good hand. Efficient, precise, unassuming. Beside her, Marines who had once mocked her, Gant among them, now worked in quiet obedience. No laughter, no sneers, only silence. Thorne approached. The yard seemed to pause. Marines straightened instinctively. Eva turned, expecting rebuke, ready to salute, ready for his contempt. Instead, in full view of every Marine in sight, Colonel Marcus Thorne raised his own hand. Slowly, deliberately. An officer, a full-bird colonel, saluting a sergeant. The base seemed to hold its breath. It was respect, it was apology, it was acknowledgement. She returned the salute, lowering her arm with the faintest nod. And in that silence, something shifted. The laughter was gone, the dismissal shattered. Respect had been earned, not demanded, not asked for. Earned in silence, paid for in action. What does respect sound like when it finally arrives? At FOB Dagger, it wasn't a roar. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't the stomping of boots or the clash of steel. It was silence. The kind of silence that settles over a place like a new law, a new order written into the ground itself. After the colonel's salute, no one laughed at her anymore. The whispers that had once followed Eva through chow, through the motor pool, through the narrow corridors of the logistics tent changed shape. No longer sharp-edged with mockery. Now they were heavy with awe. And yet she didn't seem to notice, or maybe she noticed but didn't care. She still worked the same desk in the logistics tent, still reconciled manifests, still typed with that same one-handed precision that made clerks stare and gunny sergeants grunt. She still ate alone, still kept her back to the wall, her eyes on the door. The habits of survival were too deep to change just because laughter had turned to respect. But others changed around her. Lieutenants who once ignored her now drifted past with data sheets, asking casual questions about patrol routes or fuel cycles. Analysts started sliding her anomalies they couldn't solve. A young motor pool corporal asked if she could take a look at vehicle rotation charts. She never sought it, never volunteered. She only answered when asked. But when she did, her answers cut through the fog like clean steel. Corporal Diaz noticed most of all. He had been watching her since the beginning, but now he saw something new, a gravity around her. People leaned in without knowing why. They deferred without admitting it. And still she carried herself the same way, efficient, silent, precise. But Diaz couldn't stop thinking, what else was hidden? He remembered the colonel's salute, the shock in every Marine's face, the whispered rumor that had already escaped into the barracks that she wasn't just a sergeant, wasn't just a broken operator. She had a name, a call sign. Wraith. The word traveled through the base like a ghost story. Some said she had killed 100 men. Some said she had vanished for years, fighting wars no one spoke of. Some said she was cursed, marked, untouchable. Diaz wasn't sure what to believe. But when he saw her, quiet, almost fragile in her solitude, the legends didn't match the person. One evening he found her by the wire. The storm had cleared. The desert stretched endless, painted in fire orange and violet as the sun dropped. She stood with her cast resting on the concertina, starring out like the horizon itself was a puzzle she intended to solve. "Sergeant," he said softly. She didn't turn, just answered Diaz. He held out a canteen. She accepted it with a ghost of a smile, sipping slow. For a long moment neither spoke. The air was cool, the silence was comfortable, but Diaz couldn't hold it anymore. "The colonel saluted you," he said. "That doesn't happen, not like that." Her eyes stayed on the horizon. "It was a correction," she said quietly. He waited, hoping she'd say more. She didn't. That was the way of it with her. A sentence when others would give a speech. Silence when others would spill themselves out. And yet in that silence, he felt more weight than any speech could carry. The days passed. The base returned to rhythm, patrols, maintenance, waiting, always waiting, but under the surface change stirred. Some Marines avoided her now, as if proximity might mark them. Others gravitated closer, drawn to her like moths to something steady in the storm. Gant, the brute she'd thrown down, worked under her direction in the motor pool without complaint. His pride was bruised, but he obeyed without hesitation. His silence was its own kind of respect. But not everyone accepted her presence. Late one night, in the dim glow of the barracks, Diaz overheard it. Two staff sergeants leaning against bunks, whispering just low enough to think they weren't heard. "Legend my ass," one muttered. "You really believe that crap, Wraith? That's fairy tale stuff." "Colonel sure seemed to believe it," the other said. The first scoffed. "Colonel just trying to save face. He wrote her off as useless, then she got lucky with a fight and a guess about a lost patrol. That's all, you'll see. She's smoke and mirrors." Diaz said nothing, but the words lodged inside him like a thorn. Was it true? Was he just seeing what he wanted to see? The doubt gnawed. The next day he found her again, this time behind the armory, cleaning an M4, one-handed, every motion precise, flawless. She moved like she had done it 1,000 times, because she had. "Sergeant," he asked carefully, "do you ever think about Alsem?" Her hands paused for just a breath. The barrel in her right hand, the rag in her fingers. The silence stretched. Then she answered, "No." But her eyes, dark, distant, locked on something only she could see, said otherwise. Diaz swallowed, throat dry. "The men, they say you held it, alone." She finished reassembling the rifle, snapping each piece into place with quiet certainty. Then she looked up at him. "They say many things," she said. "Most of them are wrong." He didn't ask again, not that day. But later, lying awake in his bunk, he thought of her voice. The way she had said it, flat, calm, but beneath that calm something heavy, something broken. FOB Dagger was a place of waiting, waiting for missions, waiting for storms to pass, waiting for the next attack, and now waiting for the truth of who this woman really was. The legend grew, the silence thickened, and in the spaces between patrols and briefings, between reports and drills, the question lingered. If the legend was true, if she really was Wraith, then why was she here, buried in logistics with a broken arm? And if it wasn't true, then what was she hiding? What does a legend feel like when it's still alive? At FOB Dagger, the answer wasn't carved in stone or sung in ballads. It wasn't medals or ceremonies. It was tension, a quiet pressure that seeped into the barracks, the chow line, the guard towers. It was the kind of pressure that came when you didn't know whether to bow your head in respect or look harder for cracks in the armor. Eva Rostova had become a mystery the base couldn't ignore. By day, she worked in silence. Numbers, schedules, manifests. She never raised her voice, never drew attention. But still, people watched. Marines glanced at her out of the corner of their eyes, whispering after she passed. Some swore she was the reason Victor 6 had come back alive. Others said it was dumb luck. Some whispered the word Wraith with reverence. Others spat it like a curse. And suspicion has its own gravity. Late one night, in the flickering half-light of the wrecked tent, 3 Marines decided to test the myth. Not a fight, not outright. They weren't suicidal, but a game. A little push, a little shove, to see if the stories held weight. Diaz was there. He saw it happen. They approached her while she was finishing her shift, cast cradled against her chest, right hand locking away fuel reports in a steel cabinet. One of them accidentally brushed her shoulder, harder than necessary. Another laughed, muttering just loud enough. Careful, she might take you apart with her ghost powers. The third circled, smirking, waiting for a reaction. But Eva gave them nothing. No flinch, no flash of anger. She simply closed the cabinet, turned, and walked past them. The silence that followed was heavier than any punch. They hadn't proven her weak. They'd proven her untouchable. Diaz watched the way they froze, how their laughter died in their throats. He felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that she hadn't exploded. Dread because her silence was almost more frightening than violence. That night Diaz couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of the barracks, the desert wind rattling the canvas above. The whispers kept replaying in his head. Wraith, living legend, held Alsam alone. He needed to know the truth. The next evening he found her again at the wire. She was always there, as if the horizon itself offered her something she couldn't find among men. Her cast rested on the rusted steel, her eyes scanning the distance. "Sergeant," he said carefully. She didn't turn. "You don't have to call me that all the time," she murmured. He hesitated. "What should I call you?" She was silent for a long moment. "Eva." The word felt heavier than her rank. He swallowed. "Eva at Alsam, did you really?" Her head turned sharply, her eyes cutting through him. The look wasn't anger, it was warning. "Don't," she said quietly. The single word was enough. He didn't press. But when she turned back to the horizon, Diaz saw it just for a breath. A flicker in her eyes, as if the desert wasn't desert at all but something else. Something from the past. And in that flicker he saw pain. Not the kind that comes from a broken arm. The kind that never heals. The past was clawing at her, even here. That night Eva dreamt. She didn't want to, but sleep dragged her back. Gunfire, smoke, a compound in flames. Her team's voices crackling in her headset, then silence. Bodies on the floor, walls splattered red. The sound of her own breathing, ragged, desperate, the only heartbeat left in the room. 6 hours alone. She woke with a start, sweat running down her neck despite the desert's chill. Her cast throbbed. Her chest felt tight, as if she was still holding the weight of those walls. She sat up, pulling her boots on with one hand. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not here, not anywhere. By morning, the whispers had shifted again. Word spread that Colonel Thorne was treating her differently now. Not softer, but sharper. Watching her more closely. Asking her opinion in meetings. Marines noticed. Some said it was proof she was more than she seemed. Others muttered that she had the colonel wrapped around her finger. Suspicion breeds stories. 2 lieutenants argued in the chow hall. "She's dangerous," one said. "No one with a file that blacked out should be here, not unless someone made a mistake." The other shook his head. Or maybe she's exactly where she's supposed to be. The truth lay somewhere in the middle, but no one could pin it down. Diaz found himself torn between belief and doubt. He wanted to trust her, wanted to believe the quiet strength he saw in her meant something good, but the questions wouldn't leave him alone. If she really was Wraith, why was she here, buried under fuel reports, cast on her arm, silence on her lips? And if she was, why was the general speaking her name with reverence, as if she was already carved into the bones of history? That evening he tried again. He found her cleaning her pistol in the dim light behind the armory, one-handed, precise, flawless. "Eva," he said softly. Her eyes flicked up, then back to the weapon. "Do you ever wish they didn't know?" Her hands paused, just for a breath. "They don't know," she said. Diaz frowned. "The colonel." "He doesn't know," she cut him off. "He knows what they tell him, a story, a name, that's not knowing." She snapped the pistol back together, the sound sharp in the stillness. Diaz swallowed hard. "Then what's the truth?" Her gaze lifted to his. For the first time he saw it, the shadow behind her eyes, the part of her she never let anyone see. "The truth," she said quietly, "is that I failed. And they turned my failure into a legend because legends are easier to live with than ghosts." The words hit him like a blow. Failure, not victory. She looked back down, holstering the weapon with one hand, her cast resting uselessly against her thigh. "You don't want the rest," she said softly. "Trust me." He believed her, and yet he couldn't stop wondering. The next day, Colonel Thorne called her into the command tent again, this time not to dismiss her, this time to ask. Enemy chatter had spiked again. Patrols were restless. Something was moving beyond the wire. Thorne asked for her assessment. She studied the maps in silence. Her cast hung heavy, but her right hand moved like a scalpel across the paper. She pointed out patterns the others had missed, predicted movement before it happened, spoke with calm certainty that filled the room with reluctant trust. When she finished, the tent was silent. Thorne met her eyes. "You're not what I thought you were," he said finally. Eva's expression didn't change. "No one ever is, sir," she replied. The truth was bleeding through, piece by piece. Her past was no longer just whispers. It was starting to shape the present. And as Diaz watched her walk out of the tent, back straight, cast heavy, eyes unreadable, he felt the question clawing at him again. Was she carrying her legend? Or was her legend carrying her? What do you do when the enemy moves closer than the walls can protect? At FOB Dagger, the desert didn't just test patience. It tested vigilance. Patrols returned with new stories each week, glimpses of shadowy figures on ridgelines, tire tracks that vanished into dry riverbeds, faint bursts of chatter across the airwaves. Small signs, subtle warnings. Most Marines dismissed them as background noise. The desert was always alive with ghosts, but Eva didn't dismiss. She listened. She noticed the rhythm in the reports, sightings that lined up too neatly, tracks that seemed designed to be found, noise that wasn't noise. A pattern was emerging, and it pointed to something dangerous. She brought it to Colonel Thorne, spread the maps across his table, traced the lines with her right hand. "They're not probing," she said quietly. "They're rehearsing." Thorne leaned over the maps, jaw tightening. "For what?" Her eyes lifted, steady, unreadable. "A breach." The word landed heavy. He frowned, skeptical. "They wouldn't dare, not here, not with the guard towers in Hesco." "They know your guard towers. They know your Hesco. They know how long it takes a response team to mobilize from each sector. They're not improvising, Colonel. They're planning." The room went still. Thorne studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, curt and sharp. "Show me." And so she did. Over the next 2 days, Eva became something more than a logistics sergeant. She moved through the base with quiet authority, walking the perimeter, studying blind spots, speaking with engineers. She mapped potential breach points, calculated angles of approach, anticipated fields of fire. Marines followed her with their eyes, some in doubt, some in awe, all in silence. Diaz stayed close. He carried her notes, fetched her maps, followed her questions with wide-eyed focus. He wanted to learn, but more than that, he wanted to understand. The more he saw, the clearer it became. She wasn't just trained, she wasn't just good, she was something else entirely. She read the battlefield the way other people read language, effortless, natural, like the desert was speaking only to her. But even as she worked, he saw it, the shadows in her expression when she thought no one was looking. The moments when her cast pressed against her side like a reminder, a wound not just of bone, but of memory. On the third night, the breach came. It started as a hum, faint vibrations in the wire, too subtle for most to hear over the desert wind. But Eva heard it. She was walking the perimeter with Diaz when she froze, eyes narrowing. "Contact," she whispered. Diaz's heart jumped. "Where?" Her gaze cut through the darkness, scanning the gaps, the dunes, the shifting black. "There." A shadow flickered at the edge of the floodlight's reach, then another, then three. And then the desert erupted. Gunfire cracked from beyond the wire, muzzle flashes splitting the night. Rounds sparked against the barriers. The towers roared back with machine gun fire. Sirens screamed. Marines scrambled. The enemy wasn't probing anymore. They were inside their plan. "Stay low," Eva ordered, shoving Diaz against the barrier. Her right hand moved fast, too fast for someone supposedly broken. She snatched the rifle from a fallen Marine, checked it with mechanical precision, and shouldered it one-handed. Diaz's breath caught. She shouldn't have been able to, but she did. Through the chaos, her voice stayed calm. "Tower 3 suppressing fire. Shift 30 degrees west. They're using the dune as cover." The Marine above blinked, stunned, then obeyed. His round stitched the darkness exactly where she'd said, and bodies fell. Diaz's heart pounded. He wanted to ask how she knew, but the truth was in her movements. She wasn't guessing, she was remembering. The firefight raged for minutes that felt like hours. Marines shouted, sprinted, fired blindly into the dark. Eva never wasted a shot. Every trigger pull was deliberate. Every command cut through the noise like a blade. When the breach finally faltered, when the last echoes of gunfire faded into the night, FOB Dagger stood shaken but intact. Several wounded, none dead. The enemy had tested them, but they had failed. And in the command tent that night, the talk wasn't about the breach. It was about her. Marines whispered how she had moved through the chaos with certainty, how she had directed fire without hesitation, how she had seen things no one else could. Diaz didn't need the whispers. He had been there. He had watched her shoulder that rifle, one-handed, unflinching. He had heard the calm in her voice when everyone else drowned in panic. But what haunted him most wasn't her strength. It was the look in her eyes when the firing stopped. For a moment she had stood still, breathing hard, sweat cutting tracks through the dust on her face, her cast heavy against her side, and her eyes. They weren't on the base. They weren't on the men she'd saved. They were somewhere else, somewhere far away, somewhere she had been before. Diaz recognized it. The look of someone still trapped in another fight, another night, another set of screams. Later he found her again at the wire, alone. "Sergeant," he said softly, then corrected himself. "Eva." She didn't turn. "You saved us," he said. Her lips pressed thin. "No," she murmured. "I repeated it." Diaz frowned. "Repeated what?" She finally turned, her eyes catching the moonlight. Dark, heavy, haunted. "Alcim," she whispered. The word dropped between them like a stone into deep water. Diaz swallowed, throat tight. He wanted to ask, wanted to pull the truth from her, but the look on her face stopped him. It wasn't the look of a hero. It was the look of someone who carried ghosts. Behind her, the desert stretched endless, silent. the kind of silence that followed only after screams. And Diaz realized then, the legend wasn't just about survival. It was about living with what survival cost. What happens when survival turns into proof? At FOB Dagger, the breach should have been the story. The gunfire, the holes in the wire, the scramble of Marines firing blind into the dark. The wounded pulled from the dust, patched up under the hard glow of floodlights. The desert swallowing the bodies of the enemy before dawn. But that wasn't what people spoke of. They spoke of her. How she had stood calm in the chaos. How she had called shots no one else could see. How she had shouldered a rifle with one good arm, steady as if the plaster weighing her down didn't exist. The story spread before the sun rose. Marines leaned over breakfast trays, whispering like men trading scripture. She saw them before anyone else. She told Tower 3 where to fire, and she was right. She didn't even miss. Respect had hardened into something else now, awe, maybe, or fear, and both had teeth. Colonel Thorne sat in his office, jaw set, fingers drumming the edge of a report. He had seen it with his own eyes. He had watched her turn a breach into a calculated response. She had done in minutes what trained officers struggled to do in hours. And it terrified him. Not because she was dangerous, but because she was beyond his control. He pulled up her file again, scrolling through the blacked-out lines. Name, rank, service number, and then redaction after redaction, every deployment sealed, every operation buried, every commendation, every reprimand, every scrap of detail gone. It was like staring at a ghost. The comms screen on his desk flickered. Headquarters again. A major appeared, his expression sharp, voice clipped. Colonel Thorne, we've reviewed your breach report. Something in your language caught attention. You credited one Sergeant Eva Rostova with decisive command action. Confirm. Thorne hesitated. He thought of the general's words, if she says the sky is green, ask what shade. He thought of the salute he had given her, and he thought of the unease clawing at his gut. Confirmed, he said finally. The major's expression shifted. Not surprise, something else, something like recognition. Understood, the major said curtly. Keep her in place, keep her alive, and keep her quiet. The feed cut. Thorne stared at the blank screen. The words echoed in his mind, keep her quiet. He leaned back, exhaling slow. The desert rattled the canvas walls, and for the first time he wondered if he had been wrong to salute. Outside, life went on. Patrols rolled. Helicopters beat the sky. Marines cleaned weapons and checked gear. But under the rhythm there was a pulse of tension, a shift in how eyes moved when she passed. Admiration from some, fear from others, suspicion from more. Diaz felt it. He felt it in the way his friends lowered their voices when she entered the chow hall, in the way men who had once mocked her now crossed themselves when she walked by. It gnawed at him because he didn't want to fear her. He wanted to understand her. One night he found her at the motor pool. She was kneeling beside a Humvee, her one good hand tightening a lug nut with deliberate precision, the plastered arm pressed against her side. The work light cast her in harsh shadows. Eva, he said softly. She didn't look up. You saved us again. Her voice was quiet, almost absent. I didn't save anyone. I delayed the inevitable. Diaz frowned. You can't believe that. Her hand stilled on the wrench. She finally looked at him. I've seen inevitables before, she said. Her eyes were tired, older than her face. Diaz wanted to ask more, but the words caught in his throat. He wanted to ask about Alsum, about Wraith, about the ghosts she carried. But he couldn't. Not yet. The base itself was changing. Small things. Lieutenants started sliding data to her before briefings. Gunnery sergeants paused for her opinion. Even Thorne, the man who had once dismissed her as broken gear, now lingered longer when she spoke. But not everyone welcomed it. Some saw danger in her shadow. Some saw betrayal in their colonel's respect. Some whispered words like spook and black program and ghost asset. One evening after chow, 3 Marines cornered Diaz in the barracks. Older, harder men, faces creased from too many deployments. "You're close to her," one said flatly. "You know what she is." Diaz stiffened. "She's a Marine." They scoffed. "Marines don't get files scrubbed to nothing. Marines don't pull colonels into line with a stare. She's something else, and something else gets people killed." Diaz swallowed, anger rising but fear too, because part of him had wondered the same. When they left, their words lingered. That night he couldn't sleep. His mind replayed everything: the fight in the wrecked tent, the lost patrol, the breach, her silence, her eyes, her refusal to speak of Alsam. The next day, he confronted her. They were alone by the wire again, the horizon glowing under a sinking sun. "Eva," he said firmly, "they're talking. They think you're not one of us. They think you're dangerous." She didn't turn. "They're not wrong," she said softly. The words chilled him. "Then what are you?" Finally she faced him. The wind tugged at her hair, the cast stark white against the fading light. Her gaze cut through him, heavy, unflinching. "I am what's left when the mission goes wrong," she said. "I am what they make when survival is the only thing left to give." Diaz's chest tightened. She looked back at the horizon, her voice quieter now. "You want to know the truth? The truth is that legends are born from mistakes, and I am nothing but a collection of mistakes they couldn't bury." Silence stretched, the desert swallowed it. Diaz stood there, torn between awe and sorrow, between admiration and fear. He wanted to argue, wanted to say she was wrong, but the look in her eyes told him she was. She believed it. And maybe that was the most dangerous part. Back in the command tent, Colonel Thorne studied reports with fresh unease. Headquarters wanted her alive, wanted her quiet, wanted her contained. But he knew something now, something the general's words hadn't said outright. Eva Rostova wasn't here by accident. She was here because someone wanted her here. And he couldn't decide what was worse, that they'd sent him a legend, or that they'd sent him a ghost. What happens when silence is no longer enough? At FOB Dagger, suspicion had swollen into something heavier. Admiration was still there, yes, the kind that kept Marines watching her with wide eyes in chow, whispering her name in reverence. But suspicion was louder now, sharper, carried in sidelong glances, half-finished sentences, and the weight of unasked questions. She had saved them twice, but what if she was saving them only to control them? What if she was more threat than shield? Colonel Thorne felt the pressure first. Orders from higher command came coded, clipped, urgent. "Keep her alive, keep her quiet, don't let her slip out of your hands." But hands were never meant to hold smoke. And Eva Rostova was smoke. Diaz saw the change too. The way other Marines eyed her now, not with mockery, not even with respect, but with unease. Some avoided her. Others lingered like moths circling flame. Gant, the brute she'd once flattened, worked at her side silently, almost obediently, but even he never met her eyes for more than a second. Then the call came. A convoy, ambushed outside the wire, 2 vehicles disabled. Marines pinned down in a dry wadi, cut off by machine gun fire and the threat of IEDs. The storm hadn't returned, but the desert's heat was just as blinding, and the minutes were running thin. The QRF was scrambled, but the situation was bad. The ambush had been too clean, too precise. Someone had mapped the terrain, studied the habits, prepared the kill zone. Thorne gathered his officers in the tent. Voices clashed, maps covered in circles and arrows, every option leading to the same conclusion: too slow, too late, too costly. And then quietly, Eva spoke. "They won't survive another hour," she said. The room stilled. Thorne's jaw tightened. He knew it was true. "Then what do you propose, Sergeant?" Her right hand moved across the map with surgical certainty. She pointed out ridgelines, hidden paths, the angle of the sun. She saw gaps no one else saw. "You can't flank," she said. "They've mined the approaches. You can't wait. They'll overrun. The only way is direct." The room erupted. "Direct, that's suicide. They've got machine guns dug in." "Are you insane?" Eva's gaze cut through them, calm, unblinking. "Direct," she repeated, "but not like you think. A single team, fast, silent, not a fight, a removal." Her eyes shifted to Daya's, just for a second. Thorne saw it. He saw the look. He remembered the general's words. "If she says the sky is green, ask what shade." And against every instinct, he gave the order. Within an hour, Eva was moving. Diaz followed not by order but by choice. He couldn't let her go alone, couldn't let the silence swallow her again. They rode out in a small Humvee, dust rising in their wake, the desert stretching endless on all sides. Diaz's heart hammered against his ribs. His palms were slick. He gripped his rifle too tightly, his knuckles white. Eva sat beside him, silent, eyes fixed on the horizon. Her cast rested across her lap like dead weight, but her right hand never left the rifle she carried with terrifying ease. "Eva," Diaz whispered, voice tight, "you've done this before." Her eyes didn't shift. "Yes." He swallowed. "What does it feel like?" For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer, then softly, "Like failure every time." The words hit him harder than gunfire. When they reached the ridge above the ambush site, Diaz saw it, the smoke rising from disabled vehicles, the flashes of enemy fire, the pinned-down Marines huddled behind what cover they could find. It was a kill zone, clean, perfect, deadly. Diaz's stomach dropped. "We can't." Eva cut him off. "Watch." And then she moved. She flowed down the ridge like water, silent, one-handed, cast pressed against her side. She didn't run, didn't rush. Every step was deliberate, every shift of weight calculated. Diaz followed, clumsy by comparison, heart in his throat. They slipped into the wadi's shadow. The enemy fire was focused on the trapped convoy, blind to the two figures weaving through the rocks. Eva led them closer, closer, until Diaz could see the dug-in gun nest, 4 insurgents, focused forward, rifles chattering death into the smoke. Eva knelt. She looked at Diaz, her eyes sharp, steady. "Wait until I move," she whispered. "Move, hell." But she was already gone. She surged forward, impossibly fast, impossibly precise. One shot, then another, not panic fire, not desperation, clean, surgical. 2 men dropped before they even knew she was there. The others spun, shouting. Diaz raised his rifle, fired wild, his shots kicking up dust. They aimed at him, but Eva was already there, already moving, already inside their guard. One swung his weapon, too slow. Her cast slammed into his face, bone against plaster, a brutal crack. He collapsed. The last man tried to run. She dropped him with a single round. And then it was silent. Diaz's chest heaved. His ears rang. His hands shook. He had fired, yes, but it hadn't been him. It had been her. Always her. The pinned Marine scrambled from cover, eyes wide, stunned at the sight of her. A woman in a cast, standing calm over the bodies of their attackers, rifle steady, expression unreadable. They didn't cheer, they didn't speak, they only stared. Diaz felt the weight of it, the birth of another story, another legend, another ghost added to the name Wraith. On the ride back, the rescued Marines rode in silence. Diaz sat across from Eva, watching her. She didn't look at them, didn't bask in their awe, didn't flinch at their fear. She simply stared at her cast, fingers tapping lightly against the plaster as if counting something invisible. "Eva," Diaz said softly. Her eyes lifted to his. "You saved them." Her lips pressed thin. "No," she said, "I traded for them." Diaz frowned. "Traded." Her gaze dropped back to the cast. "Every life I save," she whispered, "is another I have to carry." Diaz's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she was a hero, that she was more than her ghosts. But he couldn't. Not when her eyes told him she didn't believe it. Back at FOB Dagger, the whispers exploded. A convoy saved. An ambush dismantled. A sergeant with one arm who had done what platoons couldn't. The word spread faster now, stronger, louder. Wraith. And in the command tent, Colonel Thorne sat alone, staring at the latest report. His gut churned. Because the more she proved herself, the more he realized the truth. The legend wasn't protecting her. The legend was consuming her. And soon it would consume them all. What happens when a legend finally meets its own shadow? At FOB Dagger, the stories had grown louder than the desert itself. Every corner of the base hummed with whispers. She wasn't just a sergeant anymore. She was a myth. The Marines spoke her name like it was a talisman, equal parts respect and fear. Wraith. But legends are fragile things. The more they grow, the more they demand truth. And truth was coming. It began with another transmission from headquarters. Not clipped, not coded, direct. Colonel Thorne, the voice said, sharp over the comms. You will prepare Sergeant Rostova for redeployment. Immediate. She is no longer attached to your command. Thorne froze. Redeployment to where? The line crackled, then. Alsim. The name hit him like a blow. The reports said the siege was over, the city turned to rubble years ago, but the voice carried no room for argument. Coordinates incoming. She knows the ground, she knows what to do. The feed cut. Thorne sat in the silence, bile rising in his throat. Alsim, of all places, and they wanted to send her back there, the place that had made her legend, the place that had broken her. When he found her in the motor pool, she was already loading gear into a Humvee, one-handed, efficient, silent. You knew, he said. She didn't look at him. They were always going to send me back. Thorne's jaw clenched. You're not fit for field deployment, your arm. Her eyes finally lifted, and he saw the steel in them. The arm is what's broken, she said. He had no answer. Diaz appeared breathless, wide-eyed. Sergeant Eva, you can't. Her gaze softened just slightly. Stay here, Diaz. But he shook his head, jaw set. Not this time. And just like that, the choice was made. The convoy rolled before dawn, carrying Eva, Diaz, and a handful of Marines who didn't understand why the mission felt heavier than any before. The desert stretched endless, swallowing the horizon. The coordinates pulled them toward the ruins of Alsim, a scar on the earth, jagged walls of shattered stone, echoes of gunfire long since faded. As they approached, Diaz felt the air change, thick, charged, like the city itself still remembered. Eva sat silent in the passenger seat, her cast resting heavy across her lap. Her right hand traced invisible lines against her thigh, patterns, rhythms, memories. When the convoy halted at the edge of the ruins, Thorne's orders crackled over the radio. Secure the site, extract any intel caches. Secondary objective, confirm enemy presence. But everyone knew this wasn't about intel, it was about her. As boots hit the rubble, Eva moved first. She wove through the wreckage like she had never left it. Every shattered wall, every crumbled doorway, every scar in the stone, she knew them. She had bled here. She had survived here. Diaz followed, pulse hammering. He wanted to ask, wanted to pull the truth from her, but the silence of the ruins held his tongue. And then they found it. The compound, or what was left of it, collapsed walls, charred beams, the air still carrying the faint scent of smoke that never seemed to fade. Eva stopped in the doorway, her breath caught almost imperceptibly. This is it, Diaz whispered. She nodded once. The Marines spread out, sweeping the ruins, but Eva stayed frozen, her eyes locked on the empty space where ghosts still lived. Diaz touched her shoulder. What happened here, Eva? She didn't answer at first. Her chest rose and fell, slow, heavy. Then she spoke. They died, she said softly. All of them in the first 30 minutes. Diaz's throat tightened. But you. I stayed, she cut him off. Her voice was flat, cold. 6 hours alone, they came in waves. I held until the gunship came. That's the story. Diaz swallowed hard. That's not failure, that's. Her eyes turned to him, fierce, haunted. You don't understand. I wasn't holding for them. I wasn't holding for victory. I was holding because I couldn't leave, because I couldn't let myself die when they already had. And I killed them, Diaz. Everyone that came through that door, dozens. I stopped counting. And when the commander came, I broke my arm finishing him. Not for glory, not for survival, out of rage. Her voice broke on the last word. Diaz stood frozen, heart aching, watching the legend unravel into something raw, human, broken. You weren't a failure, he whispered. She shook her head. I wasn't a hero either. I was just alive, and that was enough for them to make a myth. Before he could answer, gunfire split the silence. Marines shouted from the far side of the ruins. Shadows moved among the rubble. Insurgents dug in, waiting for them. The ruins weren't dead. They were alive with threat. The fight erupted fast. Bullets sparked against stone. Marines ducked for cover. Diaz raised his rifle, firing blind, panic in his veins. And Eva moved. One-handed, silent, efficient. She flowed through the ruins like a ghost, every wall familiar, every shadow already calculated. Her cast slammed into a rifle butt. Her shots were clean, surgical. She wasn't fighting the ruins. She was part of them. Diaz followed, clumsy, terrified, but he saw it with his own eyes. The legend was real, but so was the cost. Her face was stone, her eyes hollow. Every kill looked less like victory and more like repetition. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then silence fell again. The ruins were quiet, the enemy scattered, broken. The Marines regrouped, shaken, staring at her like they had before, with awe, with fear, with silence. But Eva didn't celebrate, didn't even breathe relief. She just stood in the center of the compound, staring at the ground, her cast heavy, her rifle still smoking. Diaz approached slowly. Eva, it's over. Her voice was barely a whisper. It's never over. The convoy returned to FOB Dagger at dusk. The Marines carried their silence with them, the weight of the ruins etched into their faces. Colonel Thorne stood waiting. He watched her step from the Humvee, dust clinging to her uniform, eyes hollow, cast cracked and dirty. He had ordered her into the past, and she had returned carrying it on her shoulders. Their eyes met. For once neither saluted, neither spoke. The silence was enough. That night Diaz found her at the wire one last time. She stood as she always did, cast resting against the concertina, eyes fixed on the horizon. He walked up beside her, holding out a canteen. She took it, sipping slow. You carried them, he said softly. She didn't answer. You carried us too. Her gaze stayed on the horizon. The desert wind tugged at her hair. Sometimes, she said quietly, dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And with those words, the silence of the desert deepened, not empty, not void, but full. Full of ghosts, full of respect, full of the unyielding truth that some legends aren't built on victory. They're built on survival. And survival, silent and heavy, was enough.